This episode is brought to you by Marshalls, where you never have to compromise between quality and price. The buyers at Marshalls hustle hard, working to bring you great deals on brand name and designer pieces. Because Marshalls believes everyone deserves access to the good stuff. Visit a Marshalls store near you or shop online at marshalls.com.
Today's conversation, we are diving into the wild, wonderful, and sometimes overwhelming world of raising neurodivergent teenagers. My guest, Jheri South, is mom to 7 neurodivergent children and a coach and an advocate who knows firsthand the ups and downs of this journey. Trying to combat hormones, teaching kids how to advocate for themselves, as well as creating a safe place, Jheri brings honesty, wisdom, and a whole lot of encouragement. If you've ever wondered how to support your child as they enter those teenage years, or supporting yourself as a parent, or even supporting someone who is going through that as a parent, you don't want to miss this conversation. So let's dive in and grab your drink to today's conversation. Jheri, you are a mom to 7 neurodivergent kids, which I hear about. That's just amazing. I bet you have some great stories and adventures to tell us. But what is it like to have teenage neurodivergent kids?
Oh my goodness. It's like, well, from my experience, everyone's is different, but it's been a lot different than having neurodivergent toddlers. It was really interesting because I was a single mother of 6 children for quite some time. And my oldest child she was actually pretty hyper, but the other 5, they were really close together. I had them in about 7.5 years. And when they were younger, they were pretty easy. I mean, I would take all 6 of my kids everywhere I went. I liked taking them. I took them to Disneyland alone. I took them to Costco alone. They didn't empty out cupboards and shelves. They weren't super hyper. They were just kind of normal kids. They fought sometimes and they had friends and they did all the things, but they were easier. And it's funny. I remember people even saying like, wow, you have 6 kids. And I really said this to myself. I thought, what, like it's hard? I really did that, and now I have a 7th and he's crazy. And I realize what they were talking about. Like, yeah, I couldn't have had 6 or 7 of him when he was little. But to answer your question, as soon as they started hitting the preteen, teen years, it was like, what hit the fan? I mean, a lot. And I want to point out to you, and your audience may already know this, but comorbidity rates are so high with ADHD. So if you have ADHD, there's a 60% likelihood you'll have one comorbid condition and a 40% likelihood that you'll have a second comorbid condition. And so that's really what we experienced in our home. We have debilitating OCD. 5 of my kids are on the autism spectrum. 6 of my 7 children have ADHD, anxiety, depression. And I was pretty overwhelmed. Part of my story is that my son attempted suicide and I was trying to get him help and nothing was helping him. He went to counselors, he went to therapists, he ended up in a behavioral health facility. And still being a younger mom, I just didn't, first of all, I wasn't diagnosed until I was 40 years old. And so I'm getting closer to 50 just to put that into perspective. So I didn't understand what we were dealing with. I didn't know that my children were neurodivergent. And I was really just kind of, I don't know. It was a very difficult time of my life trying to figure out what we're dealing with. Why doesn't the help that I'm trying to get help them? And my opinion is, even though I have so much respect, there's a lot of counselors and therapists I've met that I just have so much respect for. But I do believe that if you're neurodivergent, probably the best help you're going to get is going to be with someone else who is neurodivergent as well and has overcome the things that you're dealing with. And I will say that I've had people tell me, I went to the doctor, I had my younger child evaluated. They said that, he might be on the spectrum or he looks like he's ADHD. He's not really having problems in schools. It's not, we'll worry about it later. It's not causing problems right now. We'll worry about it later. I don't agree with that at all, because my experience in working with kids every day and my own children is that for a lot of these kids, this isn't true all the time. Very often it's on full display as they're younger, but a lot of the time the symptoms seem manageable. It's not really debilitating, affecting their lives regularly in a negative way. And it seems as though overnight when these kids start going through puberty and hormones, start affecting them, that everything changes. And so I feel really strongly that it's like, at least know what's going on, what you're dealing with, because my kids, we struggled. And I went from someone who was anti-medication to, I really did a deep dive to realizing that some people need to be on a medication. And when your child attempts suicide, or you have kids that are going through debilitating anxiety and depression and struggling with friends and struggling with their coaches and struggling managing their emotions, that there is not a one size fits all in all of my children. Some of them are on medication, some of them aren't, some of them have needed some kind of treatment. Others, it's been all of them have presented very differently. So even within a family, just because it looks like this with one person doesn't mean it will look like that with the other.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was just about to say, like, you have had a front row seat of seeing how it is different in every one of your kids, and it presents differently. And like you mentioned as well, the medicine, some medicated, some not, some have this therapy, some don't, just that whole reality that it is different for everyone.
So
which
different.
is fun, but also hard, because what works for one
That's a good
doesn't
word.
work for
Fun is a good word. Yeah. Looking back, it's like, yeah, there have been fun times for sure. It's a journey. And I think, at least for me and what I do for a living, is there has been a lot of blessing to going through each child's journey and learning so much. The idea that, oh, okay, I helped this kid get to a healthy place, so I finally know what I'm doing, is silly, because every child requires different things, different treatment, different support at school. I mean, even within like my children who are neurodivergent within just the school system and how they do. I have a child who dropped out of school, and then I have another one who's in all honors classes and gets straight A's, and it's so easy for them. Within the same family, we have that much variance, because it doesn't just look like one thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of that switch with hormones and how it kind of happens overnight. Do you mind going a little bit deeper into that? What is that? What do you mean by a switch overnight?
Well, I just, the thing is as parents, we get to know our children and their behaviors, and we kind of just identify like they seem to be doing well or they're not doing well. And so my kids were pretty obedient. They were somewhat easy. I mean, the older they got, normal teenage behavior, we're going to expect, just irrational behavior. Sometimes it's hard to be a teenager today. I wouldn't want to do it. Social media and all the pressures. It is different than when I was growing up, and I thought it was hard when I was growing up. So, of course, we're going to see things, but with neurodivergence, we could even talk about ADHD specifically, especially because of that rejection sensitivity dysphoria component, which we can discuss if you'd like. But the sensitivity from someone who has ADHD is so much more intense than a neurotypical person. For example, we just feel things more deeply. We attach every experience to how we felt emotionally. In fact, someone with ADHD can feel just as much pain today about something that happened 5 years ago. I mean, we just feel so deeply. So these kids are already dealing with hormones and the comparing themselves, but now they're also dealing with extreme sensitivity. The other thing is the research shows that an ADHD child by age 10 will have heard over 20,000 corrective messages. So there's a lot of shame and self-loathing going on, even if they're not expressing it outwardly. And this is where I felt like I really didn't understand what my children were going through. They were very internal. They kept things inside. They weren't super hyper. Like that's not how my children presented. And so I'm not that way. If I'm struggling with something, I would have said so. So they're comparing and they're wondering, why can't I do that? How come I'm always in trouble? How come it's so easy for them? Why didn't they pick me? That's going on constantly for these kids. So it's just sending, their emotions in very bad directions, like hyperdrive in the direction we don't want to go. So I would say one thing that's really important for parents to understand about this phase of a child's life in their teenage years is that where they're at with their emotions and their hormones really creates a little bit of an emotional disaster for what their wiring is doing with ADHD. Dr. Barkley has also told us that, a child is about 3 years behind in executive functioning. So if you have a 15-year-old, they have RSD, they are comparing themselves and very insecure, they're learning to mask and people please to fit in. They're really at age 12 when it comes to regulating themselves. They haven't learned how to control their impulses. You're going to see probably some pretty terrible behavior at times, lashing out, saying that, being disrespectful, not being able to follow through on things, being incredibly sensitive to being corrected. So yeah, I think if I was going to give parents advice, it would be just understand that you're dealing with a completely different neurological system. This isn't just poor behavior. Some of it is that. And I know this is a long run-on sentence, if you will, but one thing I didn't want to forget to mention is I'll hear a lot in the school system. I do some training in the schools or from parents. Well, they'll ask me, well, how do I know? Like, how do I know if that behavior is ADHD related or it's just normal teenage behavior? And I just feel like, who cares? I mean, sometimes there's a place to really understand that, but most of the time, I would say that they can control it sometimes and they can't other times, but most of the time it's still just behavior and communication. Behavior is communication. We know that they're not getting what they need in that moment. To give you an example, a child that's in middle school out here, he really struggles controlling his impulses, but he admits to me that sometimes he just does things for attention in the classroom, but sometimes he really can't control it. But when I ask him, well, why do you do it if you know you're going to get in trouble? And he says, because if I don't do it, then I'm not going to have any friends and I'm not going to be known as the funny kid anymore. So can he control it? Yes. But is he doing it because he still needs something and he feels insecure about who he is? Also, yes. So I think that sometimes we dwell too much on can they control this? I think more energy into just how do we help this child self-regulate and feel better about themselves? That's probably a better, question to ask.
Yeah, I remember, I'm totally going to ruin what they said. I heard it from a speaker about the idea. Yeah, that idea is this normal? Is this not, kind of that? And they were kind of just saying that idea that it's their life, as in it's the child's life. And so it is all quote unquote normal to them because it's their life. And so to try and separate the two out is actually not helpful for the child because we're not worrying. We're not worrying, but we're not addressing the need, but we're looking at the fitting in the box kind of thing. And that was I remember hearing that. They said it much better than I just said it, but I
thought you said it beautifully.
Oh, thank you. But it was that was a really big aha moment of actually, yeah, why am I trying to separate this out? And when I am trying to separate, it's often because then I want my child to fit into the box that the world has created. And actually that's not how he's wired. So let's just look at the whole child. And yeah, so that's a really good reminder. And that idea, that example, like you said, of the child as well, sometimes controlling it, sometimes not, but no matter what, there was a need, that child had a need, and I think that's what we need to focus on is that need, not the why, I guess, if that makes sense. So
no, it does. I'm glad that you said that. I love what you just shared. And I think that as you were talking, I was also thinking, usually we're trying to figure that out because we're trying to figure out what would be a correct punishment. What's the consequence? It's usually why we're trying to figure that out. It's okay, but again, when we're focusing on just the discipline, does this child deserve a detention or deserve a consequence? We're not usually as focused on how to help the child. So I'm all for consequences, by the way. I'm big into consequences and rewards and having consistency and proper boundaries in the home. But I would love for all adults who are working with neurodivergent children to shift their mindset first to what does this child need before going straight to this is not okay and what are we going to do about the disciplinary action.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah. But on that note, we're just going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to keep talking about teenagers and being neurodivergent. So let's just take a quick break.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Checking off the boxes on your to-do list is a great feeling. And when it comes to checking off coverage, a State Farm agent can help you choose an option that's right for you. Whether you prefer talking in person, on the phone, or using the award-winning app, it's nice knowing you have help finding coverage that best fits your needs. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
So thinking about supporting our teenagers or our teens and something that I'll be honest, I'm worried about. So I have a 6-year-old. He's autistic, ADHD. And I know there's going to be a day where he's going to have to advocate for himself. So how could I start building that now or even in the future so that he can advocate for himself when he's older?
That's a really good question. And so I actually have 4 children who have that ADHD, autism combo, if you will, the comorbidity. And it's very common, by the way. It's interesting. I don't think people really think about this. It's more common that you're more likely that your child would have autism with their ADHD than would not. So think about that for a second, parents, right? Sometimes people are surprised to hear that there is another diagnosis like that. And it's like, oh no, this is very likely. So especially with my autistic clients, we do a lot of role playing in my office anyway, because they typically struggle in social situations. Now, when they have ADHD as well, it's like, you never know. Sometimes the ADHD is going to be more dominant. Sometimes it will be the autism, right? But I think role playing is really a healthy thing to do. A lot of kids with autism experience a huge amount of anxiety, knowing how to keep a conversation going, knowing how to approach a conversation. My daughter is 19 and is a hairstylist, and she still is scared to order her own food. And she's on the spectrum, and she'll go into Sephora. I mean, that's like her mall. She's a hairstylist, and she won't use her gift card because she didn't want to have to interrupt a worker, so that we know that there's this debilitation around even just basic things like ordering your food or asking for help finding something in a store. So now picture a child who is in school. And by the way, we know that sometimes there's great teachers and sometimes there's teachers that just seem like maybe they don't enjoy their job anymore. And so they will respond harshly with kids or they'll yell. I mean, that just shuts a neurodivergent child down, right? Like there is no way I'm going to talk to that person. And so I work really hard with my children in my office, but also in my home, helping them understand that, first of all, someone else's behavior has nothing to do with them. It doesn't matter if they asked a question, I don't know, fell on their face, said something out of pocket. They still, deserve to be treated with respect. And so trying to separate that for a child so that they can feel confident enough to walk up to anybody and at least ask what needs to be asked. But I would say that probably the most important thing is, with the parenting styles, there's 4 main parenting styles that are recognized. And one of them is authoritarian. And if anyone's not familiar with that, because there is a difference between authoritarian and authoritative. And I think that this is important because an authoritarian parenting style, which is very much because I said so, you don't need to know, I'm the adult. It teaches a child to keep their head down, don't ask questions. You're a child. It's none of your business. It leads to self-esteem issues and issues with being able to advocate for yourself in any situation, school, work. An authoritative parenting style is it's the recommended parenting style because it's not too permissive, but it's not authoritarian. It's involving the child in conversations. Maybe the child isn't going to always get their way, but what do you think your consequence should be? What do you think the rules around this should be? How should we handle this situation? When we're creating a safe environment at home, then these children are learning that it's safe to go out into the world and ask questions and advocate for themselves. So I'd say the first thing is really pay attention to your parenting style and are you shutting down your child because they're driving you crazy or you don't think they need to know something? Or is there consistently a safe environment to ask questions and to talk? And then secondly, let's role play. Oh, you're feeling anxious. And it could be about anything too. It could be with a lot of times in junior high and high school, children are having to advocate for themselves around their peers. They're someone said something, they're not being included. They really want something and they don't know how to ask. So just as much teachers and adults also just in their social settings, doing a lot of role playing, all the different ways that we would take a conversation back and forth, I think can be one of the most helpful things for someone who has ADHD or autism.
Yeah, that's such a good thing to think about as well, that role playing, but also that modeling, that kind of modeling, bringing them into the conversation of what do you think? And that idea of giving them a voice, not in all decisions in the sense that they get the final say, but in the process, and kind of reminding, like you said, bringing them in to the world and bringing them into the conversation can be so helpful.
Yeah.
What about thinking about someone, so your mom, I'm sure you had some sort of support system. What can they be? How can someone on the, I don't want to say on the outside, but another family member or friend who's supporting the parent, how can they support the parent who's obviously then supporting a neurodivergent child?
Well, what's interesting is that we know that when someone has ADHD, for example, it's very likely that one of the parents will have ADHD. So I think even that it makes it more complex, just that, I think adding that into the mix, because a lot of times ADHD adults have not figured out how to master their ADHD brain, how to make things work for them. And now they're parenting a child. And so, as a woman with ADHD, I know that the emotional regulation, I think we don't maybe talk about enough. A lot of people still think of ADHD as being this hyperactive disorder that prevents you from being able to be motivated and get things done. And it very much can be those things. But 1/3 of all adults today say that rejection sensitivity dysphoria is the most debilitating symptom for them for ADHD. And so for a couple of my kids, that's really the only thing that ever is obvious and present. And so I think that when we, have a friend or a family member who we know has ADHD or is parenting a child with ADHD, is I think just recognizing that the support for them would look like, I think mostly just being able to, I think we need an outlet to be able to talk about these things. And there's so much understanding about what it is and what it isn't. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's met with judgment or misunderstanding. Almost every client family I work with, there's a story of either my husband doesn't think this is real, or my mom doesn't think this is real, or the school system. I've had kids at school who have a full diagnosis, and a teacher will say to them, that's not autism. That's not what autism looks like. So we're getting this everywhere. Parents, adults need support from people who, if they don't understand, they're willing to learn, they're willing to listen. They understand that neurodivergence is having a completely different neurological system, the way we process information, the way that we learn, and it's really, in my opinion, it can be quite difficult to get your child through those junior high and high school years because of all the things we discussed, but then also fighting schools for IEPs or 504 plans, teachers who don't understand, kids who are failing out of their classes, tutoring's not working. So there's just so much there, and every situation's unique. But I think probably the best thing that somebody could do to support a friend who's parenting a child with ADHD is to learn more about what they don't know, and then offer, whatever, because each family is different. Wherever you see that they're struggling, it might just be a self-care day. It might be helping with that child, but offering, whatever support you can see going on in that family, instead of the unsolicited advice of, why don't you just ground them? How come you don't ever do this or that? I would hear that a lot. I would not put up with that behavior. It's that's just not helpful. And it just shows a lack of understanding for what that parent is actually going through. We don't want to ruin a child's self-esteem because we don't understand how their brain works.
Yeah, learning, educating yourself is as in the other person educating themselves is so important. And also just being that safe place for that parent to just not let loose in a bad way, but, just kind of offload and just go, oh my goodness, this happened or whatever, and not having, I always think about one of my really good friends. I will send her, I call it rage voice notes, where I just like send a voice note where I'm just like, I don't need a response necessarily. I just need like a minute to just get it all out and then move on with my day, basically.
And you can do that because you know it's not going to be met with judgment, right?
Yeah, I know she doesn't always have the answers, because she'll say, I don't have the answer to this, but I'm just going to let this sit here because I knew you just needed to let it out. But knowing, yeah, exactly. I'm not going to be judged, knowing that she's just going to listen and we're going to move on. You know, it's not going to hurt anyone. So yeah. And just that, I know from that though, she has researched things, because she'll come back several days later and go, okay, so you talked about this. What does that do? And I hadn't, until you said that, I hadn't really thought, how I appreciate how much she does that and is willing to learn about our experience. So that's such a gift.
It's huge, because I can think of people that I wanted to talk to, that I had been close and I could talk to about other things. But I noticed if I ever brought up a situation going on with my child, they were very critical. I mean, my children had some bad behavior. They were really going through it. And it was met with a little bit of judgment and hostility. Like, I can't believe you're putting up with that. Or why would you even do that? Or how did it get, it just go on. And I would feel so terrible about myself. Like, am I causing this? I must be a terrible mom. It's true. They're not dealing with this problem. Why am I dealing with this problem? A parent who, it doesn't matter if we're dealing with neurodivergence or not. I always tell parents, if you're the victim in the situation, you cannot help your child. So if you're wondering, did I do this to my child? I'm a bad mom. How come this is happening? In that moment, you won't find clarity or solutions, because you're the victim. So we have to get out of this mindset, this spiraling mindset. I think regulating yourself is the first step to helping your child become regulated. And so those relationships, if they're not supportive, they can really be damaging when we're usually in survival mode when we're going through these things with our kids.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm just like, yeah, I remember someone telling me once, you're parenting different, not weak. And that changed my whole perspective of parenting, because that's how I felt. I felt like I was a weak parent because I was letting him get away with this. I was letting him, I was allowing him to do this or that, just all these kind of things that parents have said to me in the 6 years that I've been a parent. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm so weak. I'm horrible. But actually, I'm parenting differently. And that's not weak. That's not bad. It's just different, because that's how I have to parent. And so, yeah, it's a good reminder of what you're saying as well, of like not being the victim. I'm not, to do that, I need to be out of that mindset. So that's, yeah. My mind is like really blown. I'm just like, oh my gosh, yes. So
you'll be a better parent. If you see yourself as being the parent that your child needs, you'll actually show up for that child. We shut down and withdraw when we believe we're not doing a good job. So there actually is a lot of value in deciding what you believe about yourself as a parent.
Yeah. And I've definitely, since really owning that thought of I parent differently, not weak, I have parented differently, and that I'm like, no, I feel confident in what I'm doing, and I know this is right. And yep, I'm going to get comments, but we move on. That's what I always say. We get comments and we move on.
I love that. And it makes perfect sense. If you think about it, we're constantly neurodivergent parents or that are parenting neurodivergent children. They're constantly fighting with the school system, trying to teach them about their child's unique wiring, and that they need a different learning environment and they need accommodations, not because they're trying to get, they're not cheating, they're not getting an advantage, because their brains work differently. So it makes perfect sense to me as you're talking that, of course, you're going to be a different parent. You're going to parent differently, the same way you want the teachers to teach your child a little bit differently. So I think that was very well said. I totally agree with that.
Thank you. So I love to ask this final question. There's no right or wrong response, but what do you want the world to know about neurodiverse people?
If I was going to just sum it up to one thing, I think just understanding that neurodivergent people aren't broken. And I think this gets a little bit tricky, because we are, like I just mentioned, we're kind of fighting the schools for getting our child help. They don't learn well in this environment, but it's because they don't learn well in this environment. And that's where I think there's a misunderstanding generally speaking, neurodivergent individuals will struggle in school, whether it's because of organization or it's because they're not understanding the concepts. And they'll struggle sometimes in their peer relationships and they won't follow through on things. And so there's this idea that they're not very smart or they're somewhat lazy, they're not very capable, and that they're broken. And I will say that if I post on social media that ADHD is a superpower, there will be a lot of people that come out of the woodwork and say, oh, it's ruined my life and it's not a superpower. And it's a little bit offensive to hear that. But there's just as many people that get very offended if you call ADHD a disorder, which medically speaking it is because of the executive function deficits. But the reason I would really love for people to understand ADHD better is that our ADHD brains are incredibly intelligent and powerful and creative. ADHD and autistic individuals are brilliant. And if the environment was different, just if we're ADHDers, we learn best when we can walk around and we can touch and feel things, right? We're using our body and we can be creative and we can write about whatever we want instead of the one boring thing that you're telling me to write about. If we had a different learning environment, we would soar because as soon as the hyper focus kicks in, we're able to do things very quickly, right? And creatively. So the idea that ADHDers are broken, or there's something wrong with them or they're not very smart, I would love for people to understand what ADHD really is. And that's not to say that there aren't things. We do know that we have a nervous system that can become overstimulated and we have to learn to regulate our emotions. But when somebody learns to do that, when they learn to overcome the things that are holding them back and then become more aware of the things that will put them ahead, that's when they really start to find success in their life. And so to this day, I will shout from the rooftops, I am so grateful for my ADHD. It's helped me in business. It's helped me with creativity and being an entrepreneur. We always say there's like a sixth sense. We can read people really well. There's things that I just love that I have. But if you would have asked me in my 20s, even though I didn't know at the time I had ADHD, I would say, oh yeah, it's terrible. I can't follow through on things. And RSD was just, it was crippling. But we can overcome those things. And when we do, it's a complete game changer. And if the world understands that, and there's a lot less criticism and a lot more support for our brains, then I think that we would start seeing neurodivergent individuals really start to transform the way that they see themselves at a much earlier age.
As you were talking about kind of that idea now owning your ADHD and how it can be powerful, I totally agree. But then in your 20s, even though I didn't know I had ADHD in my 20s, I would also said it was really difficult. And the amount of masking, I look back now and just think like, I'm so grateful that I had a kind of a core group of friends. And I was like, oh my goodness, they probably all thought I was two-faced because I would be so different. But that was just masking. That was what, just trying to fit in. But yeah, in my 20s, I would have said it was really difficult. And again, that rejection sensitivity, because I felt like really, I think about now, like the 20s was like the first time I was out in the real world and managing life on my own without my family. And so, it's a very different experience, and trying to cope and do all that is very different with a ADHD brain. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, rocking it. I totally get it now.
It's awesome, right? Like I love that for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and yeah, the idea of it has helped me so much in business and thinking creatively of how I want to get to where I want to go. And just, yeah, I'm like, yeah, this is so helpful. So yeah, no, it's a good reminder to remember our brains are not broken. We're not broken, and we can use them. They can be powerful. So Absolutely. Thank you very much
yes.
for conversation today and for helping us kind of really, I feel like we've really only scratched the surface of teenagers and being neurodivergent. So thank you very much.
Yes, it was a great conversation. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
One thing I'm taking away from today's conversation is that reminder that our kids aren't broken, and neither are we as parents. Parenting differently doesn't mean we are weak parents or even caregivers or that wider support. It means that we are adapting, advocating, and creating the environment our children need to thrive. That perspective shift alone makes all the difference in how I show up as a mama. Hey friend, if you've got a moment, it would be great if you could rate and review the show. It helps more amazing people like you find us, learn what we're about, and be part of this growing community. Your words make a big difference. So thank you. Go have a great week, and we will see you here next week.
Everything feels a bit uncertain right now. A few months ago, you never would have expected eggs being factored into your monthly budget. New sources of stress equal more opportunities for breakouts to strike. Luckily, Mighty Patch Original shrinks the look of pimples in just one use. We'd say that's a pretty good deal. Shop Mighty Patch at all major retailers.
Mom and Dad, the school supplies you buy me this year will mostly end up in my mouth. Maybe shop low prices for school at Amazon, so I don't eat up all your money. Just something to chew on. Amazon. Spend less, smile more.